let's talk a little bit about who some of the uh, Palestinian political prisoners are that are being released, including Zakaria Zubeidi.
Was he
Um,
released today?
that's what I heard.
Yeah, he was pulled out of the first. He was supposed to be released in the first release, and they pulled him out. Um, Zakaria Zubeidi is a leader from the Jenin camp. I worked in Jenin, and I worked around those fighters for many months and watched them in battle. And he is a significant leader. And then he was imprisoned in Jaboa prison, and he was part of the tunnel prisoner escape. A bunch of guys from Jenin, Mohammed Al Arda was
Who
part of
was
that.
also released
He was released.
last week, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're getting their people back. That is what's happening in these prisoner exchanges. They're getting operations leader. The most significant operations leaders are being exiled. Some are being exiled to Gaza in this next upcoming rounds. They'll be sent to Gaza, but many of them are being exiled abroad, which is criminal. I think forced exile shouldn't be is against international law for whatever international law is at this point in the war. But they shouldn't be being exiled, but they are. Yeah, and Iyad Jaradat is also part of the tunnel, the prison tunnel. So Gilboa prison is just the prison that Jenin prisoners would go to. It was actually in the area just up in the hills from where Izzadin al-Qassam himself was killed in 1935. So there's lots of history. The soldiers that went out, the police at that time, they were called the Palestine police, but they're soldiers, paramilitaries that went out. They left from Gilboa prison base to go and kill Izzadin al-Qassam and his band of fighters, which ultimately in 1935 led a few months later to the beginning of the Great Arab Revolt of 1936, which is what we should call the First Intifada. We call the First Intifada in 1987, but the Great Arab Revolt was a spectacular intifada of that time. So Gilboa prison is significant. And then these guys are significant because they used a spoon famously to dig out and get down into the plumbing area of the prison and then dig out and come out through a manhole. And there was a picture when they broke out of the prison. I think it was in 2021 they broke out.
I think so.
My timelines
Yeah,
are weird.
September 21. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a picture, an amazing picture. I don't know if tomorrow we'll have time, but I'm just throwing it right now. I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but there's a picture of Israeli Shabak officers looking down at the
Yeah.
hole that they came out with. They're all circled around the hole, and they can't believe it that they came out of the hole. And these prisoners, Zakaria Zubeidi is a Fatah Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade prisoner. Mohammed Al Arda, he is Sarai Al Quds, and Jaradat is Sarai Al Quds. So it was this like joint operation, right? It's like the joint operations room functioning inside the prison as well. And they got out, and they got out to see their families. They were ultimately rearrested. And when they were rearrested, Jaradat said, "Don't worry." He said to his guards in his prison when he was in his trial, to his prison guards, he said, "Don't worry, Qassam's going to get me out." And they bagged him up and pushed him out of the room after he said that. And here we are today.
There it is.
They just can't believe it. So that is the spoon. It got famous. It got described as the spoon operation because they used it's probably like more like a ladle. They used a ladle from their soup to do it, and they did it over the course of a number of years to dig through. And this is actually a success of the prisons. This is a success of the prison movements because continual hunger strikes in the prisons got better conditions for Palestinians, security prisoners in these prisons. So ultimately, what it has led to at this time is that the prisoners are actually all in communal space. Ali was talking about his time being isolated. Once you can have the prisoners in communal space, that's where you can talk resistance. That's when you can talk theory. That's when you can teach history. And that's when you can come up with plans like this. They can cover for each other because they have 13, 14, 18 people in an area. Someone can be a lookout for the guard, and they can send a signal when the guard's coming, and the person with the spoon can stop digging. So this is a multi-layered success, this tunnel escape. And it's a success both of the Palestinian resistance, the hunger strikes inside the prisons, and the fact that the resistance on the outside of the prisons is always trying to free the people inside the prison. Yeah, there's another one of them. Look at, he's just stroking his beard like, how did this happen? And it's remarkable. And the fighters were fighters once they got out too. They evaded capture through the hills, just like 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 did, the very same hills, evaded capture and made it back to the Jenin refugee camp. And the last 3 of them were captured in the Jenin refugee camp, where they went to see their families. Remarkable story. So they're being freed today. Zakaria Zubeidi is a hero from the 2002 Battle of Jenin. And so I think in an upcoming show, what we'll do is we'll itemize and tell everybody who the prisoners that are being released are. Haven't really had a chance to do that because there's been so much else to cover. But we should give attention to who was released, because giving attention to who was released in the Shalit exchange would have gotten a bio of Yahya Sinwar.
That's right.
We know the impact that he has made.
Well, that was extraordinary, John, a truly extraordinary report. One thing I'll say about my time, again, not to compare it with Gilboa prison, but the Swiss prison guards were very careful about getting the plastic spoons back with the meal trays. You couldn't keep the spoons.
Yeah.
But I don't think
Plastic
you could have
spoons.
dug plastic spoons, and I don't think you could have dug out of there with them either. But they said,
I don't think we can tell you on air with YouTube community guidelines what you can do with the spoons.
well, yeah, I don't know, but they say we do need the spoon.
Yeah, it's remarkable. The Gilboa prison break is just, there's so many layers to it. The history, the fact that it's a product of prison resistance itself. In North America and in other places in the world, prison is a place where you send someone to send them away from the political movement. It's the way to isolate them. In Palestine, it's the pillar of the movement. And on the inside is all the people who are prepared to return to struggle. So the onus is on people on the outside. And that's why Yahya Sinwar said that all the time. The onus on the people on the outside to get the people on the inside free. That is an obligation of the Palestinian national movement. And this is the success of October 7th that we're seeing. And it's only just beginning. We're only at the 3rd release of the civilian and women soldiers. There is a second phase of this deal where there are presumably many higher, at least, ranking soldiers, Israeli soldiers, who will require a toll that, according to 𝐓𝐡𝐞, is going to empty the prisons. That was the goal of the October 7th operation, was to empty the prisons. At this point, we're doing 50-to-1 life sentences and long sentences for each soldier. But I think you can expect it will be higher for the male soldiers and the commanders of those bases that were overrun.
And of course, that's in the 2nd and 3rd phases of the ceasefire deal, which will only happen if Israel continues to abide by the terms. Of course, there's always this, as you called it, during the Lebanon ceasefire, the uneven ceasefire, right? Like Israel still gets to snipe and kill Palestinians. I mean, just in the past week, there's something like 80 Palestinians, I think, have been killed in Gaza after the ceasefire. But, you know, the the second and third phases still have yet to happen.
Yeah, so I
And
was just pulling out the timeline. The negotiations for phase 2 begin February 3rd, so they should begin next week, and that will be a significant negotiation.
And it will be one that Israel tries to sabotage and draw out. But I mean, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I remain hopeful that it will go as planned, because we continue to see, despite these very bizarre statements from Donald Trump about moving Palestinians out of Gaza. I can't remember if had he already made those statements on Tuesday. I think we talked about them.
Yeah.
That people are not going to be leaving Gaza after they've survived this genocide. They've returned to the North victorious. They're not going to voluntarily leave to Jordan or Egypt. And who's going to force them if everything Israel didn't force them? But I think that despite those rather erratic statements from Donald Trump, we're still seeing Steve Witkoff, his envoy, basically acting as an enforcer of this deal. And I think the big picture remains that, in a sense, Israel has lost its deterrent against Gaza, because the thing it held over Gaza was this idea that I think everyone believed at some level, that if Israel wanted to put in the effort to topple Hamas and take over Gaza, they could, even if it would be very, very costly. That's, of course, at the very beginning, John was saying and others were saying that they're not going to succeed. I get that. But at the same time, nobody knew for sure at that point. Nobody knew for sure. And remember, we were talking about flooding tunnels and putting gas into tunnels and all sorts of things, because nobody was quite sure what the Israelis could do or what the resistance could withstand. Now we're sure they can't do it. And the show of military force and discipline that the resistance is still able to put on is clear. So Israel doesn't really have a deterrent anymore against Gaza. They don't have the leverage they have is the leverage they've always had, which is to try to block aid, to try to make the population suffer. But there too, the population have withstood the absolute worst that human beings can do to one another. They're still suffering from it. We shouldn't think this is over by any stretch. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying that Israel is not, I think it was John who said this, you don't dismantle the Netzarim corridor if you're planning to just restart the war.
Right.
And so I'm still hopeful that this is going to keep unfolding. And Donald Trump has invited Netanyahu to the White House next week, I think, to discuss peace in the region or whatever. But that could just as well, maybe this is me being optimistic, that could just as well be him summoning Netanyahu to tell him, look, don't mess this up, and you do what I say. And if you want us to, there's, in a sense, and again, people can tell me if I'm being way too optimistic here, but it's sort of a reverse Biden, because, or this is a hypothesis. I'll say this is a hypothesis. With the Biden administration, you had fake criticism of Israel. Oh, they should be more careful about bombing civilians, and we're going to delay the 2,000-pound bombs for 5 minutes, and we really care about getting humanitarian aid in. We're going to surge humanitarian aid in, which they never did. So there was fake criticism and fake criticism for Israel sometimes, and fake sympathy for Palestinians, while behind the scenes it was carte blanche, do what you want, go as hard as you want, kill as many babies as you want, bomb as many hospitals as you want. Whereas with Trump, it's unconditional public love and a little bit more, some quite firm enforcement behind the scenes. that's a hypothesis. I'd like to hear if anyone thinks that holds water.
Hmm.
Maybe it's just me being optimistic.
Well,
But the
the way-
basis of it and the bottom line is it's because the resistance won on the ground.
Yeah.
And the way that these phases of the deal overlap, and the reason why it's a super complicated agreement, is because Israel reneges on all of their points of the agreement. And 𝐤𝐿 and Sinwar said it most clearly, that the siege, the blockade of the last generation, that is warfare. And the goal is to end the war. And so the siege has to be lifted as part of phase 3 of this deal. And phase 3 ties into phase 2 in order to make it so that there are guarantees, because everybody who watches this conflict can imagine that Israel's just trying to get back its soldiers, and the day they get back their soldiers, then they go back and do whatever they want. And that is why each part of this agreement is overlapping with the other, and it weaves together as an effort to get guarantees that these things will happen. So if Israel wants to get back its soldiers, it has to operate in a way that it has not operated before, or they're not going to get their soldiers back. And so if this is something that Israel believes that it has to happen, that they need to get their soldiers back, then they're going to need to go phase 2 and phase 3 are linked together, and they have a way to get their soldiers back, and that way is to end the siege. And that will be a historic moment for Palestinians. Again, we're trying not to get ahead of ourselves.
Right.
There was a point where we were trying to not get ahead of ourselves, to say there's significant cadre who are about to come out of prison. And we said, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't want to be wishful thinking. But they're already talking about senior leadership. Ahmed Sahadat from the PFLP, Marwan Barghouthi's name has continually come up in phase 2. The numbers themselves, the 50-1 for each soldier, how many soldiers are there? They've already, in the first part of the deal, talking about getting half of the life sentences out before the actual captured soldiers are exchanged. And the rate for the captured soldiers is going to be high. We remember the Gilad Shalit exchange in 2011 that took 5 years to negotiate, after the Palestinian resistance tunneled under the wall and came up and captured a tank gunner whose name everybody knows. It was 1,027 prisoners for a single soldier. So the goal is to empty the prisons. And if they don't empty the prisons, then they're setting themselves up for another October 7th, because the guarantee is that they will free the prisoners. That is the oath of these people as prisoners. That is the oath of Sinwar, who spent from 1988 to 2011 in prison. The oath is that you don't leave them behind. And that should be the oath of the military as well, leave no man behind. But Israel's in the process of
Is shoot them in the back.
hunt
Hannibal
your own
directed,
soldiers and
shoot them
shoot
in
them
the back.
down, bomb them from the air, shoot them, bomb them before they even get to Gaza. Then once they're in Gaza, bomb them. Then once they try to come out and find you and surrender, like in 𝐤𝐿�2, you hunt them down and kill them.
Maybe it's
and yeah.
leave no man behind in another sense of the word, in a sort of mafioso sense, as in if you can't
Leave
get
no
them
man
back,
alive.
Yeah.
Leave no man
That's
alive.
it.
But also there's a political dynamic within Israel with this, because with these scenes that we're seeing week after week of the releases, including today, and many of us will have watched the releases that happened today, which I'm sure we'll discuss in next week's program, but the imagery was incredible. They released one Israeli soldier at the ruins of the home of Yahya Sinwar, and again, the imagery, they had the captured Israeli weapons everywhere, and all of that, and just an incredible show of force. But at the same time, Israelis are seeing scenes of happiness, of Israeli families being united with their loved ones that they didn't see for 15 months, except on those very exceptional occasions, and during that first 8-day truce back in November of 2023. And I don't so that there's a dynamic within Israeli society, I think, or I hope, that's being created where the society is not going to want to go back to war, even if Netanyahu and a few in the leadership want to, for whatever reason, whether for their own personal reasons or political reasons, that train, in a sense, has left the station. At least that may be what the resistance is hoping, that there is such a momentum to this that the Israeli society that's already shattered, already exhausted, already feels defeated, already went from, if we think back at the beginning, we had it taken down from our YouTube channel, so we can't show it. But they had that song, of that genocidal children's song. Remember that video singing that within a year we're going to eliminate Gaza and kill everyone and build our houses, and it will all be rainbows and sunshine for us, and they will be crying. And none of that happened. And so they went from that sort of genocidal, vengeful euphoria to feeling defeated, and feeling defeated for good reason. So I'm just saying that I think and hope the dynamic is towards advancing the Palestinian people to liberation. That this is not a status quo thing. This was a huge shift in the dynamics of this situation, a historic shift.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to continue to see. I mean, we keep hearing talk of there being a plot for Netanyahu wanting to restart the war after they've got their prisoners out, and again, we've talked about this before, how even some people on our own side are understandably skeptical about the ceasefire and about Israel keeping to it, because Israel's got a history of breaking ceasefires. But for these reasons that you're describing, Ali, I mean, and the phases that John has described, I mean, I think we are going to continue to see this, and it's going to be hard for them to go back to war for these political reasons as well as the military reasons, and the sort of the reality is, as we've covered, and I wrote an article about this a few months ago, that really the Israeli military was really on the verge of collapse. The Israeli army was on the verge of collapse for months, and there's increasing signs of stress in Israeli society, and lack of willingness to go back to war, lack of the will to do it, and as well because of the phases of the release of the ceasefire and of the prisoner exchanges. We just thank you, Tamara. That's the article that I wrote, that I'm referring to. Because of the secrecy within the Israeli media, and with it, imposed by military censorship of the identity of the Israeli prisoners of war that are still in Gaza, the military prisoners of war, we don't know who they are. We don't know who all of those men, mostly men, are, and we don't know their ranks. There was talk and some reports very early on, I think probably on the day itself of the October the 7th, 2023, of a very, very high level Israeli military officer being captured. Now, we have not really heard anything about that since then. So the sort of 50-1 exchange, some of in terms of 50 Palestinian political prisoners released for Israeli prisoners of war, military prisoners of war, it may be even higher than that in some cases. We just don't know. So it's going to be something that obviously we're going to have to continue to cover very closely.
Yeah, it's going to be way higher than that. That was the civilian release part that those numbers were from. But yeah, Asaf Hamami, who is the Gaza Division Southern Brigade commander, is known to be captured. So that's a senior figure. That's the kind of figure that is going to release an Ahmed Sadat or a Marwan Barghouti or an Abdullah Barghouti from Qassam. Israel's saying they're not going to release Abdullah Barghouti, who's an operations like an engineer, a bomb maker that Israel doesn't want to release. But the political figures like Sadat and Barghouti that's the rank. They're going to want people of senior ranks, and we don't fully know who was in those bases, dead or captured, and that has been kept under wraps by Israel pretty tightly through the military censor. So there's a lot more to be known, but the 50-1 was the humanitarian. The number will be much, much, much higher for the soldiers.
So the second phase is supposed to begin next week, February 3rd.
They start negotiating on it.
They start negotiating. Okay. And then when is there's no date yet set for the implementation of phase 2?
Phase 1 is 42 days, and that ends March 2nd. Okay. So the phases are each Saturday they will release 3 more soldiers starting on February until March 2nd. And then phase 1 can be extended. So phase 1, if they start negotiations on February 3rd for phase 2. If those negotiations that start on February 3rd for phase 2 don't resolve before the end of the 42 days, which would be 1 month later, if it takes more than a month, the 42-day stage continues. It doesn't immediately revert back to war. This is part of the way that they've weaved everything into each other. So that 42 days of stage 1 would be extended. And that's, I think that, I don't want to make predictions, but that is one that I think we could see be delayed because the stage 2 negotiations are very, very significant. The number of soldiers, the number of to be released, but also the structure of the reconstruction of Gaza, how that is going to work, and the end of the siege is all tied into that. Those are very fraught negotiations that could carry on. I think it's reasonable to think that it's possible for it to carry on for months.
I mean, I remember our contributor Asim Al-Nabi, who's the spokesperson for the Gaza municipality. He reiterated this this past week. You know, the United Nations and in other international aid agencies are saying that there are 50 million tons of rubble by their estimates. And it would take, somewhere between 10 and 20 years to clear and rebuild Gaza. But as Asim said, and he said this about a year ago, but again, just reiterated that this week, that's under the using the guidelines of how many trucks have been allowed into Gaza, and including the trucks that are filled with reconstruction materials that Israel has prohibited over the last 17 years of this siege, of course. So yes, if the siege continues and if the proper equipment isn't let into Gaza, sure, it could take 10 to 20 years, but Palestinian engineers have crunched the numbers. And if the siege is lifted and if the proper materials are let in, Asim says that it would take about a year to not just clear the rubble, but rebuild significant portions of Gaza. And so that also, I think, is really important for those of us in the West who are reading these reports, who are, kind of becoming very frustrated with, oh my God, 50 million tons of rubble, and the UN estimates 10 to 20 years, that Palestinians already know how to do this, that there is already plans in place by the top engineers in their field in Gaza, who have plans, who have, blueprints of how to carry this out. And it just, it depends on the West, and it depends on this siege, this barbaric siege of almost 2 decades being lifted.
Well, the way that Qassam has negotiated and Hamas has negotiated, the soldiers should not be returned if there is going to be a blockade. So that
Yeah.
is the way that this has been structured all along. And that's why it's been considered by Israel to be a difficult negotiation.
Right.
And William Burns, the CIA director, former director, who's the back channeler, he said it was the most complicated negotiation that he's carried out in his life, because Hamas refuses to give in on the core tenets of the deal. They'll give you a little bit of flexibility around the margins, like they'll let an American company come in and do the security checks. If that, makes it so that Israel will move to the next stage. They sent impotent forces who can't do anything, which is interesting in the post 9/11 world, that they're sending special operations, special operations mercenary companies to search cars of Qassam fighters, but not be able to arrest them, is like, doesn't look like a win, maybe if you just look at it in the Washington Post story, but it's a significant development and the success of these negotiations.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, there is always so much to cover. We'll have so much more to talk about next week. But let's leave it right there for now. I want to talk about the website. We've published these extraordinary features. I quoted from one by Rasha Abu Jalal up there at the top. Just extraordinary features as people are returning to their homes in both the north and the south of Gaza, trying to plan for what's next. Absolutely stunning features that we've published over the last week. So please go check that out. We also have incredible analysis by our staff editors. There's Dave Cronin's blog up at the very top there, about the EU rewarding Israel for genocide by approving a new drone deal. So please go read that. Extraordinarily important analysis by Dave. Also, we have media analysis and critique by Michael F. Brown. Of course, Ali, we have those two statements that we, the staff, published.
I was the news. I
You were
was
the
the news for a few
news.
days. And
That's right.
let me just say about that I'm still going through the so many messages I received by text, by WhatsApp, by email. I haven't even started going through my email. I have more than 1,600 emails I haven't gone through yet, through Twitter DM, and the support and solidarity and love, not just for me personally, but for all of us at EI, for what we do, is just so humbling and extraordinary. And I can't tell you how grateful I am. And remember that we're still here. We've never not been here. And even if attention starts to drift in the mainstream media or other places, we are going to be here, and we're going to keep the focus on Gaza, on Palestine, on the struggle that is going on. And we are going to continue working with our colleagues in Gaza, supporting them. We still need them to tell us what's going on and to keep doing the extraordinary reporting they're doing. And we still need to work with them and support them, and we're going to be here for the long haul. So I just want to say again, thank you to everyone for your sustained support of the work we do. And if you want to continue to do that, this is a great time. It's always a good time to sign up to give a monthly donation of any amount that you can afford, by going to electronicintifada.net, and you can click donate now, or you can, if you're watching on YouTube, there's a link in the description. But the point is, if you want to be part of this for the long haul, that's a great way to do it. And as always, give what you can. Don't give if it's going to cause you or your family or someone who depends on you hardship.
We did have a few people actually write to us while you were inside, Ali, said they'd made donations because, as a way to stick it to the Swiss, I guess.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. That means a great deal to me. And Our goal is just to keep doing this work and make it available for everyone, everywhere. And it's incredible that our audience is growing all over the world, and we can also thank the Swiss for that, because a lot more people became aware of us over the last few days. What did they call that? The Streisand effect. They wanted to
That's right.
silence us, and they ended up giving us a far bigger platform, and we want to use it to keep doing this work. And remember the discussion we just had with Abid Ayoub of ADC at the beginning of this this live stream, the importance of knowing your rights, being wise in terms of what you can and can't do, given whatever position you're in, but don't back down, continue to speak out, be in solidarity with one another. And we have to continue to do this. We are not, I am certainly not going to give up. And I don't think any of us are. And that's the message I want to make loud and clear, especially after the last week or so.